You are listening to We Are the Compassionate Revolution. I'm your podcast host, therapist, author, boundaries guide, Molly Moon. If you are a compassionate person and you want to know your worth, set better boundaries, live from your truth, and operate in your fullness, then I am so glad you've joined us. You ready? Let's get started. Last episode, we talked about codependency, and I want to continue that conversation here with something about codependency that I think is really important for us to understand as compassionate people. Something most of us don't know, even though it's so deeply affected our lives. But before I get started, I just want to say one more time that I don't actually use the term codependency a lot once we get into real boundaries work, because I don't find the term helpful there. Now, before we get into deep boundaries work, I think codependency can be a really helpful term. Not, though, when it's used as a term to pathologize. Not when it's used as a label to define yourself by forever. And not when it's used as a means to judge or shame you or others. Not at all. But I do think that the word codependency does a good job, honestly, as an umbrella term to describe a cluster of symptoms that compassionate people tend to experience because we have no idea what our boundaries are supposed to be, and we have to make them up. In a dominant culture that doesn't know what boundaries are either, but also doesn't tend to value people with traits like ours. So this focus on codependency here in this podcast episode and in the last one is to validate you, to see you, because I see you. You are seeable. To help your thoughts find a way of organizing your experience so that you can have understanding. And most importantly, to bring you hope for healing. Because codependency is not who you are. It's maybe what you've had to become in order to make it in this world, but it's not your truth. It's not your essence. And it's not your future, unless you want it to be. Because there is a path out of codependency, and it is not as hard as you might think. But it's also not your fault you got here in the first place. And I'm going to break this down for you in today's episode. First, who ends up getting stuck with the symptoms of codependency in a culture like ours? So I see people all the time who get stuck with the symptoms of codependency. And I consider myself one of them because boy, was I ever stuck. Particularly before we start working together or just as we begin working together, most compassionate people I see qualify for that diagnosis, at least in part. And these folks have commonalities to them in that they all have one or more of what I actually consider to be highly desirable traits. Once we have our boundaries, these are highly desirable traits. So see if you relate to one or more of these three positive primary traits. First one, highly responsible. I often call these types of folks helper, fixer, givers, because if there is a problem, they are there to help you or fix it or give you what you need so it can be made better. So if that describes you, there's a high responsibility drive that you have, right? Have you always had it? There's a high responsibility drive. Most helper, fixer, givers just came into this planet with that high responsibility drive. And it's mixed with a compassion or an awareness of others, a sense of connection to others. So it's a very relational responsibility. You're not here just for yourself, and you know it. But without boundaries, what happens to you? Without boundaries, we tend to exhaust ourselves helping everybody else but ourselves. The second positive primary trait I like to call an empathic feeler. An empathic feeler is a term I use for our empaths, or folks who are highly attuned to the emotions of others. And boy, do empathic feelers have a read on emotional energy. There's also sometimes some real creativity gifts or intuitive gifts here as well. Many empathic feelers tend to go in a direction that often involves healing or just operate as healers in their personal lives. Again, you're not here on this planet just for yourself, and you know it. As an empathic feeler, you feel all the things. Sometimes it feels like way too much. And honestly, without your boundaries, it probably is. But once you find your boundaries, a lot changes. Okay, third primary positive trait, last but not least, I like to call this third group loyal lovers. And again, you might be noticing a theme in all three of these. You know, when you're a loyal lover, you know you're not here on this planet just for yourself. Loyal lovers are people who are loyal in their love. And I'm just not talking about just romantic love here, because this can be seen in your love for your children or friends, family members, even a workplace. And yes, also a spouse or romantic partner. The point is, once you bond, and then you're like that person who goes down with the sinking ship. You're so connected to the people that you love, but without your boundaries, you sometimes forget that you are also a you, that you exist independently, and you don't actually have to go down with every sinking ship. But anyways, whether you have just one of those primary positive traits or two of them, or if you have all three, and there's a quiz on my website that can help you figure out which one of these is the strongest in you right now. And I say that a little cautiously because as of this recording, we're getting ready to put this quiz up, but it's not up yet. But I think it should be out by the time this episode airs. And if it's not, it will be up soon. Okay. But go to boundary.com, see if there's a quiz there. If there is, you can take it. If there is not, don't send me an email, Matt. It'll be there eventually. But the point here is this. If you come into the world with some primary strengths like those, but then you get put into a dysfunctional system, and that dysfunctional system could be your family. You know, maybe you're born into family dynamics where the boundaries are all sorts of wonky and unhealthy. And by the way, many families are dysfunctional simply because our dominant culture is so dysfunctional that nobody knows what's healthy anymore. So when I say dysfunctional family, I'm not trying to blame your parents or your extended family, unless you feel like they should be blamed, in which case, fine, blame them. But in many cases, everybody's just doing the best they can with what they know. And we've all been kept from healthy boundaries. So how are your most recent ancestors supposed to know any different, right? So whether you got put into a dysfunctional family or you were just born into this dysfunctional world we have in our dominant culture, it's incredibly normal for compassionate people to develop traits that fit into what would be called codependency. And let me break this down a bit further for you. When I say dominant culture, which is a word I say a lot, and it occurred to me I really should define that at some point. So when I say dominant culture, I am using that sort of as an umbrella term. And I'm talking about the set of ideas and values that most of us were raised with in the United States and much of the Western world. And this usually means a culture shaped by capitalism, individualism, and the idea that success comes through self-reliance and competition. And for those of you who love studying this stuff, yes, colonialism and patriarchy absolutely fit into this conversation because they shaped the form of individualism that dominates Western culture. Dominant culture tends to elevate values like might makes right. Really? Might makes right? Does it? But dominant culture just elevates that as a value and doesn't question it. It just is. Dominant culture tends to elevate personal achievement above collective good. or hyper-independence while dismissing or devaluing things like collective care, interdependence, and community. In fact, it might even think of community as being weak, dependent, or primitive. And America is a highly individualistic culture. But if you're born into it, then you don't really even know it, right? It's just part of the way things are, like the air we breathe. Individualism shapes how we think without us even knowing it. I mean, I love learning about this stuff. I am studying this stuff, but I am also very aware there are things I don't even know to question. They're so deeply embedded into me because I was born into this. Check this out. Researchers who study this stuff all have their own different ways of measuring how individualistic or how collectivistic a country is. There's even a whole individualism versus collectivism index. But basically, I'm summing up studies here. So you can Google if you want to make sure that I'm right. But basically, the US almost always wins. Sometimes Australia wins. They're kind of neck and neck, those two. And the UK is right in there with them. But the point is, I don't know if this is something we want to win. Because in this case, winning the individualistic award means we are extreme. Because there is a whole spectrum that ranges from highly collectivistic to highly individualistic. And where are we in the US? We aren't just somewhere on the extreme. We are on the farthest edge of the extreme when it comes to individualistic. And that's the point I want to make for you. When you live in dominant culture, you call it normal because it's what you know. We are literally living inside of an extreme way of doing humaning. And I think that's interesting also because most of my Boundaries program clients come from the 3 countries that win the most extreme individualism award. It's wild, huh? Not surprising. Compassionate people, intelligent, talented, successful, amazing humans. Many of them are counselors, leaders, gifted and caring, the salt of the earth types of people. But we are almost always really struggling, either with our emotional health or difficult relationship stuff that gets so confusing, so tangled, or straight up exhaustion and burnout from pouring ourselves out to help others. Because individualistic cultures, which naturally operate on a very self-centered framework for the individual, do not work so well for folks like us who are wired to care about others. Now, why do I want you to know this? Because if you've ever been in circles where the word codependency or people-pleasing has been used, you've probably been told your codependency is all about you. This problem you are having is all you. And I want you to know it's not all you. Codependency is not your fault. The macro affects the micro. You are a you, yes. And there are things you are responsible for in healing this, yes. The healing's not just going to happen. You're going to have to go get it. But also, you do not live in a bubble. You exist, we exist inside of a socio-cultural ecosystem that flavors everything. And the flavor of this hyper-individualistic ecosystem is really hard on anyone who has a heart. And that is actually a sign of your health. To not do so well in a very dysfunctional system is actually a sign you have something really healthy in you. It's like healthy cells in a body that has cancer. The healthy cells are not the problem. The cancer is. But we've been taught to think that the way dominant culture works is the norm for humans, is how it should be, and that we have something wrong with us somehow for having these codependency symptoms. Wrong. But because we don't know that, we blame ourselves. We think something's wrong with us for not figuring this thing out better. But in reality, we're living in a system that has a way of doing humaning that is actually an extreme. When studied by researchers, we are living in a cultural system that is actually an extreme. And whenever you find extremes in anything, you'll find reactions to those extremes that are actually attempts to mitigate or correct the harms being done by the extreme. And I believe codependency is one of those things. I believe codependency is an attempt by some inside the extreme system. I believe codependency is an attempt to mitigate the extremism. And yet, what it ends up doing is causing a different extreme. And what is the cure for it? Us finding our boundaries. Because our boundaries are aligned with our health, with our optimal good, not just for ourselves, but also for others. And I talk about that more in my mini course, so I'm not going to repeat myself here, but I recommend it if you resonate with what I'm saying here. But back to independence. I got off on a tangent there. So researchers in cross-cultural psychology have consistently described the US as a model of vertical individualism, which means not just personal independence. We're not just into our personal independence, but we're also into weaving our independence in with competition and hierarchy. As in, I want to be free, but I also want to be the best. And other researchers focusing on different aspects of our unique version of independence call it hyper-independence, which I think is funny because it actually goes really well with the idea of vertical independence, because we don't just value independence. We're so good at independence that we have made it hyper-independence. So we win. We're the most independency of the independents. It just gets really, you either have to laugh or you cry, either one. But this hyper-independence is a beloved trait. It's much celebrated. It is seen as good and it is rewarded. We love it. This self-reliance, do it yourself. Don't ask for help. Don't need no help. Now again, independence as a value in and of itself isn't bad. It's really cool. Values are cool. It's when independence gets worshipped that it can get ugly, because then it's unboundaried. That's when independence will start doing harm, because it's not in alignment anymore with what is in the highest good for the humans. It's been lifted up on a pedestal where it doesn't belong. And what does this hyper-independence do to a people? Well, look at the emotional health and the mental health rates for Americans, for one thing. This hyper-independence creates shame around asking for support. It leads to isolation. It leads to burnout. It leads to the belief that needing others is a personal, moral failing or weakness. This is so sad because humans actually are wired to connect to others and to need each other. Because of this hyper-independence, we are believing that our need for connection is a flaw. Wow. And it also creates then, naturally, in many folks, a belief that other people who are asking for help must not be trying hard enough. They must be lazy. They must be bad. Because if it's shameful to ask for support, then people who admit that they need help are somehow flawed. Because if they were better, they wouldn't need it. So this hyper-independence not only causes people to avoid asking for help for themselves, but it also decreases their desire to help others, and it decreases their compassion and empathy for the problems of others. Now, how about for those of us who are compassionate? Well, we naturally tend to see some of the flaws in hyper-individualism. We might not even call it hyper-individualism. We might not even be aware it's there, but just something in us knows that's not right. That's not okay. Because we are attuned to the emotions of others, for example. You can't tell us not to care about others because we just do. We can feel their feelings, those of us who are empathic. Those of you who are, helper, fixer, giver types, right? Because you see others with eyes of compassion, because you tend to see the needs of others sometimes before they even see them, you often can see that some folks are struggling not because they're not working hard enough, but because, they have a really hard situation. There are many factors in play. Homelessness is a great example here, or to put it more respectfully, people experiencing homelessness. That is one of the clearest examples about how hyper-individualism can erode compassion. Because in a culture that glorifies pull yourself up by your bootstraps, we often treat housing insecurity as a personal failing instead of as a collective responsibility. And there are entire cities who solve the problem of people without houses by kicking out everybody who doesn't have a home. And that's how they solve that problem. The lack of compassion on a macro level tends to lead to a lack of services, which leaves people without the support they need. And you can ask any good social worker. I know there's social workers listening to this. Ask a good social worker and they'll tell you all sorts of stories about why someone is living on the street without a home. There are many, many things that can happen that can cause that, most of which are totally outside of that person's control. And also, without help, how in the world is a person without a home supposed to get out of that situation? Somebody would say, well, I can just get a job. Okay, how do you go just get a job if you don't have your ID anymore, if it's lost or stolen, or you don't have clean clothes, or a place to take a shower? As compassionate people, we don't subscribe to hyper-individualism much. We actually think it's good when other people ask for help. We think it's good that services are provided. We love to see that. In fact, some of us are the reason why a service exists. Some of us are the reason a nonprofit was started to help. Many of us are helping professionals. We think help is good. And for those who are not directly helping professionals, we still love the idea of people getting help. Many of us are generous. If we have extra money, we give it to a cause that we love. We're down for helping others. So you don't see that hyper-individualism showing up in us in the way it often does. But hold up, don't get too comfortable because let's check in here. I want to show you something. How do you feel when you are the one who needs to ask for help? Right? How do you feel about your own needs, about the fact that you have needs? How do you feel about that? How do you feel about self-care? About doing kind things for yourself or giving yourself permission to just rest when you need rest instead of being quote, quote, productive? We have internalized this hyper-independence message in all sorts of unconscious ways towards ourselves. And here's where it warps into becoming a trait in us that is codependent. So write this down if you're taking notes. Because one of the key traits you'll find in codependency is that we learn, whether it's early on as children or as an adult, we learn to stuff our own feelings and discount our own needs. Now, we are attuned to the feelings of others, yes. We are attuned to the needs of others, yes. We can't not care about those things, we just do. But we're very disconnected from our own feelings. And therefore, we are also disconnected from our own needs. And this can cause us to perform well for others, to do well for others in this hyper-independent culture. And in fact, we often win awards, we get pats on the back, we get gold stars, we tend to be very good at what we do, and we care. We can focus on helping others, we can use our skills and our talents and our energy to seek to lift others up. Because whether we've ever put it into words or not, whether we've even realized on an intellectual level that this hyper-independence thing is a thing, internally, deep down, we recognize that hyper-independence is bullshit and that people need each other. However, we, unconsciously, because of just breathing in this cultural birthwater of ours, we believe we ourselves should be hyper-independent. And we beat ourselves up if we think about getting help for ourselves or feeling our feelings that aren't going to make the people happy or just having human needs. Now, there's more I want to say on this, but I'm going to start winding us down for this episode. I'm not done. More to come on this next time. But in closing us down today, let me say this. If you've ever found yourself here, where you care deeply for someone else. Maybe just one other person you're so connected to, or maybe it's others, plural. But you struggle to recognize or honor your own needs. Please know you are not alone. And those patterns do not mean you're broken. They are natural responses to being totally confused about where the boundaries are supposed to be, but knowing that the self-centeredness that we're taught in our culture is not it. It's not right. That's not the way. We absorbed these messages about independence and worth and care, and we know it's not right for everybody else. But what is right? Where are the boundaries? How is it supposed to look? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to care? We don't know, so we've been making it up as best as we can. The truth is, your needs matter. Your feelings matter. You are allowed to be a human, and you deserve care just as much as all the other people you care for. The work of healing from codependent traits is not about becoming less compassionate. It's about learning to include yourself in that circle of your beautiful compassion. So as you go about your week, I invite you to practice noticing your own needs with the same tenderness you give to others. Even just taking a little pause or a moment of rest to say something kind to yourself. Instead of beating yourself up for not working hard enough, instead of beating yourself up for needing something from someone else, remind yourself, it's okay for me to need something from someone else. I'm a human, and humans work best when they work with others. It's not selfish of you to have needs. It's being a human. And speaking of help or needs, right now, if you haven't already seen this, my team and I decided to offer the Boundaries Breakthrough mini course for free. I don't know how long we're going to do this. We're just trying it out. If boundaries are something you need, I highly recommend getting the mini course. It's a great way to get started on a deeper boundaries journey. It's super helpful in and of itself. It goes into what we've been talking about here. But it really digs into a lot of the inner beliefs we have that block us from better boundaries. So it gets more personal. And also, if you resonate and you want more, then the last video in the mini course tells you how to come work with me more closely inside my boundaries program. And that's the place, I'm telling you, that's the place where codependency goes away. That's the place we stop talking about codependency, really, because we're busy becoming boundaried. And one of the really nice side effects of becoming boundaried is that stuff like codependency organically begins to resolve. So anyways, if any of that resonates for you, you know where to find me. Boundary.com, and my website's in the show notes. And I look forward to getting to help you with this. It makes my heart happy to think about it. All right. Until next time, remember, love is the way, and you deserve the same love you so beautifully give to everyone else. See you next time. My compassionate friend, I am so glad you're with us. We are the compassionate revolution. We are the change the world needs, and we're becoming it. If you loved this episode, please share it with a friend or give this podcast a 5-star review. I'd appreciate it so much. And if you'd like to get practical and work with me more closely on boundaries, you can come visit me at boundaried.com. That's boundaried with a D.com for amazing resources. Because this is how we do it. One action at a time. We are moving into our power. And I'm so proud to be in this movement with you.